Hey guys, I am Dr. Kim Sage. Welcome to Coffee with Your Shrink, or whatever you want to call me this morning. I'm so happy to have you here. I hope that you will find this series helpful. As a licensed psychologist, I have to say that there are so many ways to study relationships and mental health, but at the core, I truly do believe that attachment holds the key to understanding a lot of what happens to us, especially in childhood. So this series is just kicking off. I've been just sort of laying the groundwork, and we're going to go now into the deeper work of understanding attachment and the caregiving styles and sort of where we need to go to begin to heal. Quick thing to keep in mind is that you cannot heal attachment completely through books or podcasts or even courses or YouTube videos, though this information I do believe is vital. You have to first understand what happened to you and sort of where you struggle, and then work on enacting these healing behaviors through your own reflections, through your own body work, through relationships, because the truth is we are hurt in relationships and we can be healed in relationships. That is really the bottom line and the belief system around attachment. So if you are just joining me, please feel free to subscribe and click the bell, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. This is a new thing for me, trying to post every day and doing a deep dive into this series. And so I'm sure some videos will be more compelling than others, but at the end of it, I really hope you find this content helpful. Now, I'm going to be going really deep into all of these issues also in my courses coming up. I have a course on identifying, childhood emotional abuse and neglect. And as you know, I'm still finishing my course on healing and dealing with the trauma of narcissistic and borderline parents. So I'm going to cover some stuff here that I will also cover in my course, but it will go much more in depth in the course. But at the end of the day, it is really all the tools I use, and so I don't want to hold them back from you here on YouTube either. Okay, so today's video is really about beginning to look at the attachment patterns from an understanding of what kind of parenting we had. What was the caregiving style that created this internal map that we have, right? What happens is you're born into whatever family system you're born into, and caregivers start taking care of you, right? And so as a result, you develop a belief system, a map, a religion, if you want to call it, about how the world and relationships work, about your own body, your own safety, your own sense of self. Do I matter? It really is about everything. So as I go into this is kind of a new thing for me. I'm going to be making more videos on. But I want you to understand that even before we have an attachment system developing, we are these biological creatures responding from our nervous system and our brains, right? That whole connection of mind and body to what's happening. And so this is happening below our consciousness. It is certainly happening in childhood without any real, we're just like little blobs, developing in that regard. But why it's important to understand is that our reactions to our caregivers occur not only in the relational dynamic and in the brain, but in our nervous systems, meaning that we are responding at all times to cues of safety and cues of danger and cues in need of protection. And that is where you'll often hear that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, the trauma responses, please and appease, attach, cry out for help, and collapse. I'll go into those even more down the road in this series. But the bottom line is that we are responding in our bodies at all times. And words like fight or flight, that really corresponds to what is happening in our body, in our nervous system. Is our sympathetic nervous system gearing up to somehow go into some kind of mode of protection or survival, or responding to danger? Are we going down into that what's called dorsal vagal, that sort of collapsed state where we can often be depressed or truly play dead in order to fight for our lives? You'll often hear victims of assault talk about, I froze in my body, and then have a lot of guilt and shame, but frankly, that was the safest thing you could do and a very common response, right? So the bottom line is that this connection of our bodies ties into the caregiving styles. And I'm going to go more into our brain responses because I want you to understand that it is not just about, rethinking how you see yourself in attachment, but really getting that we have to also do work on our bodies to teach our bodies, you know what? You're no longer in that super chaotic childhood. You're reacting to it like you are. Your body has learned over time to just respond, but you're not there anymore, right? You're living, let's say, in an apartment, or you are in a safe family now. But that is why we can get so triggered in attachment anxiety or other responses, or even more shut down, that more avoidant dynamic, in service of protection, because that is how we took care of ourselves. That is the hallmark and source of what you hear, how we regulate, right? And so, for example, a child with a caregiver who was distant, who shut down negative responses, has learned that I have to kind of go into myself, and all that crazy crying out and need inside that I would have as a toddler, maybe when I was crying and it wasn't being responded to, I have to find new ways to deal with that feeling and to soothe my body and somehow survive. And so that is the hallmark of polyvagal theory. And you hear a lot of therapists now talk about, connect to your body, get in your body. It's like, what the hell does that mean? So we're going to talk about that. So I'm going to try to keep this video short. I know I'm really trying to keep them under 10 minutes. This one might go a little bit longer, but I will be going into each of these styles and the body relationships and what needs to heal in the next videos. So we have the 4 attachment styles you're aware of: secure, anxious, preoccupied, they're often called, dismissive or avoidant, or dismissive avoidant, or avoidant dismissive, and then disorganized, often also called fearful avoidant, fearful. You hear a lot of different words. And the truth is, within disorganized style, there are a lot of variances in the research and the children's that sounded funny, in the children's responses in terms of the research. But we're just going to keep those 4 and kind of keep them in that category. At the heart, a secure attachment style, we're going to have general attunement, a child feeling safe and seen, a parent being generally responsive. We're going to see the child feels valued. They can go and seek assurance and comfort, and then also take that with them and maybe explore the world and take a little more chances out there. Now, some kids have, I will say really quickly, a more risk-taking temperament or an easier temperament and all of that. And that can affect, as I said in a few videos ago, attachment. But the core is that this caregiving style, historically done research on mothers, but could be anyone, is not threatening and dangerous and confusing. And so what connects to the body for you is that you kind of know how to soothe yourself. You can get yourself back together. You can let yourself be upset, but you're not constantly being upset or constantly shutting down. And so I would say with those with secure attachment, they're generally able to soothe their bodies when they're upset, to sort of comfort themselves. And I would guess that for them, things like mindfulness and meditation might come a little easier, but at the core, because of the parent's ability to soothe them, they are better at soothing themselves. Now let's go into what happens with a more anxious type of caregiving. The core of this one is maternal unresponsiveness, inconsistency, and a lack of predictability. We're going to see less responsiveness at times to the infant's cries. So they are sometimes there and able to meet needs and sometimes not. And when they do, oftentimes the timing was poor, they say. It's like they didn't quite meet the child in that moment. They missed it and then maybe went in later to soothe. And so they weren't doing that on purpose, but because of their own difficulties and often even their own anxiety, they're missing those opportunities. We see the parents often multitasking, like on the phone, holding the baby, doing the dishes, which I think we've all done. It's just that if you always do that and you never really have face-to-face, eye-to-eye, there's an impact. We can see over-controlling behavior and oftentimes a connection over fear. These parents were often very fearful, and knew how to, to soothe the baby's fear, which in some sort of unconscious way allowed a connection. Oh, we know how to connect when you're scared and I'm scared. And I think that fearfulness often can make these parents overly controlling because they're trying to manage their anxiety. They're like playing out a million scenarios about what could happen that's bad. They are often over controlling and trying to minimize something bad happening. But as a result, often infusing lots of anxiety into the child and lots of fear, which then becomes oftentimes a very fearful and controlling adult. Now, what happens in the body? Same thing. Because these kids are not learning how to soothe, they're operating in a very high level, often a very fight or flight, very activated sense of that sympathetic nervous system dynamic. And so we can have a hard time with attunement and slowing down and calming our bodies. And so that is going to be one of the very important things we need to learn to do, not only in adjusting our responses and expectations about relationships, that they're always going to end, or they're unpredictable, or we can't count on them, or we're going to be abandoned, or we're going to lose this relationship. We have to work on soothing our bodies to get to a clear space to then decide how we're going to respond in response to relational triggers, trauma triggers, and things of that nature. Now, in terms of the avoidant mothering style, we see what you've heard me say, repeated maternal rejection, because the research was done on mothers. But the core is that it's not like the child is being actively rejected all the time. It's that the child's bids and attempts for connection are being dismissed. Or like, oh, I don't like it when you're fussy and crying and angry and negative, but I like it when you play quietly next to me. And so I'm going to reinforce that and shut down those needs. And so over time, the child learns to deactivate those needs and to almost collapse into their bodies, to kind of go very internalized, or to need to be alone. And autonomy gets really valued, and these parents like it when their kids are really autonomous. And so the child is left in this painful state of sort of pseudo-autonomy where they have to learn to regulate alone. And so your challenge in relationships, not only in working on acknowledging things like, yeah, I do need people. And yeah, I really, oftentimes this is true, I really, as an avoidant person, they will say, I really do want to be in connection. But you've learned to literally not only shut down and deactivate those needs, you've also done it in your body. And so part of your work is learning how to connect to your attachment needs and your longings, and to allow those to arise and emerge and to begin to act upon them, as opposed to always shutting them down in your body and in your attachment system. And lastly, in disorganized style, we have the source of fear is the parent, is also the source of safety, the same parent. And so these parents are often in frightening states themselves. They can be frightening. They can really have this chaotic pattern, although there can be a pattern to the chaos, but at the core, there really isn't a way to know what these parents want or need or feel. It can run the spectrum from being extremely dangerous and unpredictable to just really confusing all of the time. These parents are activated in many different ways. They can be aggressive and loud and looming. They can often be in their own states of unresolved trauma and dissociated and sort of like shut down. So the baby or infant is trying to read them, but they can't. And it's often called fear without solution, meaning like you're afraid, but there's not much you can do about it because you still need this caregiver to survive. And so in this type of pattern, we have to learn to recognize what those different states are in ourselves, not only in a relationship, like how we might shut down or how we might get activated or confused. A lot of my patients can get foggy in this state because you can also be in a disorganized state and not necessarily be in this attachment style, but you sort of like shut down and everything feels overwhelming. It's like patients will literally say to me like, I don't know what to say right now. You're asking me these questions, but I don't have a memory. I don't have an answer. And so same thing, we want to work on regulating and helping our bodies from that collapsed state and or that really activated sympathetic state, and finding ways to engage and calm ourselves before we decide then what we're going to seek or do or respond within relationships. So of course disorganization is it's a bit more challenging, but often more common in children raised by, I would say, untreated borderline parents, narcissistic parents. That can depend upon their rage and their criticalness and lack of empathy. And it can also depend upon, the two different parents in the system and how they were regulating or not, and what kinds of attachment behaviors you were getting. But the first part to begin to understand is really reflecting on today and I'll go in more, as I said, into each style in our bodies, but what is the style that I resonate with in terms of my attachment? What do I think my caregiver style was? What do I think happens for me? And to begin to notice, just starting today, in your body, what does it feel like when you feel hyperactivated and hyper aroused and stressed? Is your heart pounding? Does your head start to hurt? Do your shoulders tighten? Alternatively, what does it feel like when you want to shut down and remove yourself? I will say for me, as an only child and also somebody who can, as an introvert, so this complicates it a bit too, but someone who, when I'm really upset, often my first impulse is to regulate alone. I can find that, like, my children trying to talk to me and I'm kind of feeling stressed, but I don't want to share it with them. That gives me anxiety. I mean, this push-pull, right? Where we're like, I need to regulate alone, but that's not possible right now in my body, and my kids are needing me to be present for them. And so we can talk more about how to do that. I use things like the container exercise, kind of putting it away, trying to just take some breaths and say to myself, okay, for example, you can process this later. Right now, you need to get yourself into a calm state. And so learning how to, do things that get yourself calm, like I'm saying, which are breathing exercises, meditations, removing yourself for a few minutes. We'll talk more about how to do that. But the first part is to begin to recognize, where does my attachment dynamic that's playing out, where does that show up in my body, and in what ways? What triggers that? Is it loud noises? Is it chaos? Is it a feeling of rejection from my partner or my coworkers or my boss or my kids? When do I tend to want to shut down? Where do I get foggy, right? What triggers foggy? Oftentimes therapy, as I said. Or maybe your partner is coming at you and trying to resolve something, even a more secure partner, but the idea that you have to sort of collect yourself and respond gets you flooded and makes you feel foggy. And so that is really the first thing I want you to really start to connect. We're going to keep talking about how our body impacts our attachment system and response. And so the next few videos, I'm going to talk over the several next ones about our body and brain and dynamics there, and about each of these styles, and more exercises about what you need to do to work on healing. So I know this video, I have no idea where I'm at for the timing, but I know it was longer. So I hope you found it helpful, and I'll post some journal prompts to please use in your journal, and feel free to ask questions around these specific videos, and I will try to answer things related to the specific videos. And then of course, if the questions involve later videos, try to save those, but keep posting them and asking me about them. And please feel free to, as I said, follow me on TikTok, where I post every day as well. And I thank you so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Please stay safe and well. Take care, guys.